Councillors, we move on now to apologies. We have an apology for early departure from Councillor Newell, and I think apology for partial absence from Councillor Wiley. Is that right? I'll move that those apologies be accepted. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. I'll further move that we confirm the agenda, and I'll move that Council confirms the public part of the agenda with the following alterations in regard to Standing Order 2.1 option C be adopted as per the order paper, and that item C5 and the confidential part of the meeting be taken before C2 to allow the DCHL representative to be in attendance. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, declarations of interest. I'll move that the Council notes, or are there any amendments to the declarations of interest? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Since the agenda came out, the Predator-Free Dunedin Trust has been formed, and I'm a trustee on that, and I'd like to declare that interest. So I'll move that Council amends the elected members' interest register as per the declaration of Councillor Wilson as attachment A, and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. I'll further move that the Council notes the executive leadership team's interest register. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. On to confirmation of minutes. I'll move that the Council confirms the public part of the minutes of the ordinary Council meeting held on 28th of August 2018. Second to Councillor Staines. Any discussion on that? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Minutes of committees. Economic Development Committee, Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that Council notes the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 11th of September 2018.
Second to Councillor Gary. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. Hearings Committee, Councillor Wiley, I think, or Miss Finance. Sorry, Councillor Lord, you nearly just lost your day in the sun.
Could have happened.
Finance
could have happened.
Councillor Lord.
I'd just like to move that the Council notes the minutes of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisation Committee meeting held on the 11th of September 2018.
Thank you, Councillor. Second to Councillor Hall. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. Councillor Wiley, Hearings Committee.
Recommends that Council notes the minutes of the Hearings Committee meeting held on the 5th of September 2018.
Seconded, Councillor Wilson. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Councillor Wiley, you're going to do a bulk lot again?
Yes, Your Worship. I'll move that the minutes of the community boards for Wakawai, Otago, Strathtyre, West Harbour, Saddle Hill and Mosgiel Taieri minutes be accepted.
Right, okay. Second to Councillor Hall. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, on to the reports in general and right straight into the Mount Ross Road Bridge replacement options. Welcome, Mr Saunders and Ms. Are you on your own? Or? Oh, and Ms Mash. No, you're not quite on your own. Would you like to introduce?
Introduction.
Go straight into it.
Have the introduction. Right. Open it up for questions, councillors. Questions of staff on this report. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Just a question, and I forewarned you about, is appreciating that at the last infrastructure services meeting where this was discussed in June, we went for a basic design without suspension because of the cost factors. Those costs have now gone up, and I'm sure that you can explain why, but also understanding the design implications of a suspension bridge were substantially more expensive, but I'm just wondering if that's still the case given the new costings that we've got on the report today?
Yes, so the costs have gone up significantly, as you can see from the report. The key reason for that is that the flood modelling that hadn't been completed in the early feasibility, which we were aware of at the time, has now been completed and means there's a substantial raising of that bridge to provide for future floods. That means that not only has the bridge span increased by 20 metres, there's also a significant amount of earthworks required on either side of the bridge to tie in the roads, the approaches to the bridge, which has led to the increased costs. The second part of that question around the design, the option that's been chosen for the design, I don't have the information on costs, but is largely to do with the timing. And obviously the priority of the community to get this bridge up and running supports the design that's been put forward as the preferred option to be able to deliver it, still aiming for within this financial year.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a question around clarification. Mr Saunders, on page 30 it talks about 65 tonne, and on page 32 it talks about 60 tonne. Which of those is it? Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, I was just asking that. So it's HPMV, which is a design of up to 65, but it will take all of the size of trucks that we heard at the previous committee meeting for the full-size stock trucks. It's ensuring it can take those safely.
Up to 65
Yeah.
tonne, not 60. And am I right in understanding that that's a requirement of a new bridge by NZTA? We don't have a choice in that?
It's in the standards. We could elect to build something of a different, but it wouldn't be of a different standard, but it wouldn't be considered best practice. Those standards are there, so we would always choose to follow those.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, Richard, I'm just trying to wonder, on page 34 of the agenda, it says option 3.32 will attract additional costs associated with approach construction and connection to the existing road alignment. Land purchase will be required. And then under the disadvantages, you've put this is the most expensive option due to the realignment of the approaches. The option may take longer to construct due to land purchase requirements and was the least supported option during consultation. And I'm just trying to wonder, with those negative factors, why that would be your preferred option. When I looked at the option 2, it seemed to me that those would be less. I just wondered how you came to that conclusion.
Yeah, certainly. So one of the key considerations there, which that we took into account, was the risk to the project timeframe through the consent process, and Heritage New Zealand are a significant contributor to that process, and their indication of support for option 3 weighed heavily on our recommendation. I understand subsequently there's been some conversations with Heritage New Zealand that may mean that's not as much of a risk, but we put a heavy emphasis on the ability to deliver this project quickly. And we felt it was put the time frame. There were two things that were going to put it at risk: the design of the bridge and the consenting process. So for that reason, we recommended option 3 to remove that risk from the project and give us the greatest confidence to deliver it.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Elder.
How much would it be possible to replace like for like, and how much more would it cost?
I don't have that answer, sorry, councillor. We haven't looked into it following the previous recommendation to go with a new bridge.
Councillor Vanders.
Can you explain why it was that we got to make a decision on the bridge before the flood modelling was in?
It was to enable the process to continue moving so that we could try and meet the objective of delivering it within this financial year. So recognise that we were short of information at that stage, which has led to the increased costs. But had we not got that early decision to allow the design work to progress to a point where we could get some accurate costings, we wouldn't have been able to make the time frames. And again, based on the feedback where the number one priority was re-establishing that connection, we felt it was more appropriate to get that guidance at that stage and refine the costs as we went.
Is that a roundabout way of saying that the process was hurried and the flood modelling was considered not to be that important?
No, the flood modelling was always considered very important. The process, we did bring the report earlier than we may have otherwise to ensure we could keep the process moving rather than delaying it by 2 to 3 months, which would have added that time on to the end of the process. So it was a decision at the time to put the report up, knowing that we didn't have that, but certainly not lessening the importance of it. It's the key piece of information to ensure that whatever we build now will last in future flood events.
Given that a suspension bridge has all of its mechanics and suspending above the roadway, would the flood modelling that we now know about, would that have favoured a suspension bridge because you're able to get the water level that much closer to your roadway?
It would have, a change in design would have changed the amount that the deck would have been raised, and therefore the amount the approaches will need to be raised, because of the design issue you're describing. Would it have changed it? I can't answer that, Councillor, because again we haven't looked much further past that given the decision at the previous committee meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Saunders. Just a question around and I realise these are indicative illustrations in the handout, but option 1 is a fairly prosaic option, the type of above-ground infrastructure we've committed to no longer building. So I'm just wondering, were that to be the will of Council to support that option, what would the process look like as this progresses, to give effect to our arts and infrastructure policy at the design stage?
Yes, good question. Look, we would probably need to engage with Nick Dixon's team and also the community board to see what options they believe there are in a design or in a design like that. There obviously are some things on that indicative that change. Some of the feedback at the community session around the fences or the guardrails to be suitable for stock means that there will be some changes there and maybe some opportunities to weave some things through that process. But that's something we would need to get some advice on. I certainly wouldn't be providing that advice.
Oh, that's fine. And so, which I guess answers my second question as to whether staff had a view around option 2 with the incorporation of the historic, any incorporation of the historic elements that isn't included as an option partially to give effect to that that policy that hasn't been considered by your team?
No, it hasn't.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Just getting to the consultation component of this. So the public consultation clearly goes for option 2, 67%, and then the Strathtyre Community Board supports that. So is it the Heritage New Zealand assessment that they would like as little done to the abutments as possible that moves you towards option 3?
Yes, that was significant in our decision to make that recommendation, and that there's not a significant difference in the cost because of the raising of the finished level of the bridge means we would have to do the earthworks for both options. Yep. So those two things together meant that despite going against what was fairly considerable support from the community for a specific option, so we don't do that lightly, we felt that was still the best option in this case to meet the primary objective of getting the connection back.
Okay. So basically, though, that's what we're balancing then, effectively, those two decision sets. Great, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Laufiso.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Saunders. So I'm just referring to the paragraph 20 and 21 about the proposed diatomite mine. In the course of consultation, those community members that expressed concern about the proposed mine, even though it hasn't got resource consent yet or sort of, did they then go on to express their feelings about a bridge related to their concerns?
Yes, they did. So the parties that expressed concern about that were largely the ones that preferred no option, because we didn't offer an option that was a lower specification bridge or a bridge that couldn't take the heavy vehicles that we were proposing to meet the objective of the heavy farm machinery. So there were a number there that expressed that concern, and obviously their concerns were based around potential changes of use in that area. We didn't consider that through this process. We were responding to the request at the previous committee meeting to make sure it was suitable for the heavy farm vehicles that want to use it.
Further questions? Right, well, we'll move on to the substantive part of it. Councillor Wilson, you want to move something?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm proposing to move a three-part motion, which has been slightly updated since I sent it to my colleagues by thanks to Councillor Hawkins. The first part is the Council to decide to build a replacement bridge on the existing alignment as a priority. And I'm sorry I haven't used the options 1, 2 and 3 because I find it particularly difficult when there's several different options being provided in the reports that don't quite match up. I understand the and give some weight to IPENS and their submission about the suspension bridge, and have added a second one, which I'm happy if it's taken separately, that staff confirm that given the new height and length required, that a pile design is still the preferred method of construction. And the third part is ask Heritage New Zealand, the Community Board, and Councillor Lord as the Community Board Councillor to work with the community to develop an appropriate reuse for the rock pillars, including and the bridge, the possibility of incorporating them into the new bridge design.
And seconded, Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Thank you. In answer to talking to this motion, I very much reflect on the very strong submissions given by the local community to the infrastructure services meeting, where getting a replacement bridge is vital, and I don't think we should delay that. I think also that the Heritage New Zealand generally take a pragmatic view that if there is an ability to reuse heritage items in a way either on site or elsewhere, and that's a point that they're happy to discuss, I understand, then they can support a design in this location which may not even include those there. I visited the site on Sunday. I have to say that there is very little of it, the heritage still visible on the site, and certainly wouldn't be necessarily enhanced by adding modern work to it, in my opinion. I wanted to reflect also on the costs, in answer to Councillor Elder's question, that over the reading from the Rock and Pillar, east of the Rock and Pillar, sorry, over the Taieri at Sutton's, the suspension bridge, a handsome stone structure which was built by Mr Bain, contractor, for £2,724. It was built in 1885. That by today's standards is $515,000 with a wee bit extra. And it just shows you the productivity perhaps, or the expectations that we've gone from what was probably at most a 10-tonne bridge to something that now takes 65 tonnes, and the cost imperatives that has. So certainly I think that thinking that this bridge may last for 100 more years is about getting it out of the water, and that is also why I've suggested the second part, as per the questions from Councillor Vandervis.
Thank you. Further speakers. Councillor Vandervis.
I think it's unfortunate that in order to get this bridge progressed and to get it to within some annual time frame, that design work was done prior to flood modelling being available. With the new flood modelling, or with the flood modelling that I believe we should have waited for, we're now in a situation where basically an entirely new bridge has to be designed. It has to be higher, it has to be wider, and the advantages of trying to hurry the thing along I don't believe have been borne out. And I believe also that to make a decision without the flood modelling has basically excluded or made less likely the possibility of a modern suspension bridge in the same place as well. I would like to think that staff would recognise that designing or progressing a bridge design prior to flood modelling has been a mistake, and that in future we would get the flood modelling done before we built the bridge over the anticipated flood levels. The issues regarding the heritage aspect of the bridge, Councillor Wilson has confirmed that there's not much left of the heritage remaining, and that if the stone pillars can be reused anywhere else by the local community, I'm all for that. But I'm concerned that the hurry that we've been in has been costly, that we are now looking at essentially designing a bigger, wider, higher bridge, and that our ability to essentially have options on what type of bridge is appropriate have been made before we had all the facts in.
For the speakers, Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the work put in by staff at our direction in a particular way, noting the urgency of re-establishing the connection and working with the limitation and risk of Heritage New Zealand's requirements. And sometimes that poses some challenges. Also acknowledging the community's engagement with this process. And I take on board what Mr Saunders said about not going against those wishes lightly. But I always think of crisis as an opportunity. And this was a crisis for the community, and it's also an opportunity. And I think the community has embraced that opportunity and been very clear about wanting a bridge, a modern bridge, because that's what they're faced with, but offering up the idea of the heritage elements being used elsewhere in another place. For me, looking at the visuals for option 3 on page 38, I simply aesthetically find that really jars for me. I can cope with option 2 better, but even so, believe the heritage aspects could be used better in another place. And so I will be supporting this motion from that viewpoint, but I do want to acknowledge the staff followed our direction on our last decision and thank them for their work.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks. I'm obviously going to support this, and obviously the community's feedback is they want this bridge built quickly. But I would also, I remember the words of Councillor Vandervis, who said that if we take the word heritage out of this bridge, we will effectively get a straight bridge across the river, which is effectively what we've got. So to the councillors who had heritage removed from the last motion out of from INSCOM, from the Infrastructure Committee, some of those councillors said they have exact confidence that we would not end up with a straight bridge right across the river, and that's what we have now. So I do remind those councillors to consider their words and consider that when you deliberately take a word out of a motion, that you may not get exactly what you wanted because you have not instructed the staff. You have instructed the staff to do exactly what they did, and I do agree with Councillor Gary, the staff have done exactly what they were instructed to do, which is come across with a bridge across the river, which is our first priority. I'm hoping with this motion that the third paragraph, where we do take into account Heritage New Zealand, the community board's wishes, and I'm glad that Councillor Lord will be actually acting as the representative of the councillors on this group, do take into account what is left of that heritage value and make sure something is left for the community of Middlemarch for 200 years from now, when they can look back and say that was at least that remnant is what was at the Sutton Bridge. Thank you.
For the speakers. Well, for my part, I will be supporting this motion. I think it's a constructive way forward. I think that what has been provided for us, as Councillor O'Malley has said, is exactly what Council asked of it, and I thank them for their work. The recommendation they made, which is, I'd remind everyone, a recommendation, not a decision, and I hardly think it warrants the criticism that has been levelled at it. They did it in good faith, weighing up the things, but it is our responsibility to make the decision, not the staff's, and I remind everyone that it is very easy to give staff instructions on things and then criticise them for doing exactly what they've been asked to do in this case. And I would point out that had they done something different, there are councillors around this table who would have criticised them for that, either way. Okay, I'm going to put this.
Hang on, item number 2, that staff confirm, staff can do that now if you want to hear that rather than just leave
okay.
it.
Right.
Leave it on the table. Staff can actually give you the answer to that second paragraph now.
Sorry, I may...
They can now.
Sorry, and I haven't allowed you to write a reply either. But what the chief, so I'll do that after the chief has just reminded us that the staff can actually give an answer to the second para, in which case we don't need to vote on it if it's satisfactory answer.
Yeah, based on the information we've got on the works plan, it is the correct height and length which has been established through the design process, and it's the correct construction methodology to meet the objectives that have been set. So I can confirm that, which is why it's been put forward. So it's just some clarity around what's expected from that second bullet.
Sorry, Your Worship. I had understood that because of our motion that we passed as a council, that consideration of alternative designs like a suspension bridge, as suggested by IPNs whose letter is attached to the report, had been discounted and hadn't been pursued because we were looking at it, we'd decided this. Now, given that it now has to be raised up and is longer, the question I had thought that this motion addressed, and also to the point of Councillor Vandervis, was that given that it's now 20 metres longer and higher, do the engineers still think that this is still the best one to pursue? And I had...
Rather than a suspension bridge?
A suspension bridge rather than 2 piles in the river at the nearest point. And so I just wanted an email to confirm that from the engineers, and I hadn't thought that work had been done, sorry.
So my understanding from what Mr Saunders has just said is that he has confirmed that that is the case.
Yes.
It's fine, then that can be deleted.
So you're happy as the mover to delete that, and the seconder, you're happy, Councillor Benson Pope? So, right. So there's now only 2 parts to it. Do you want to exercise, you were clarifying something there, Councillor Wilson, do you want to exercise your right of reply? Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to put this, is there anyone who wants it taken separately, the 2 parts separately? Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Richard. That was unanimous as far as I'm concerned. Yep. Now, on to item 17, Waste Minimisation Fund Grants. Welcome, Chris. Would you like... So, no introduction, councillors. Go straight to questions of staff and Mr Henderson and Ms Mash on this item 17. Any questions? Councillor O'Malley.
Just a background question. This is really just to formalise how we're going to do this grants program, right? Yep, thanks.
Further questions? Councillor Elder.
I was just asking,
the intent of the grant is about changing community behaviour. Is that what you were looking at? Or encouraging good behaviour, rather?
Yeah, so it's encouraging good behaviour. It's to enable community groups and businesses, as it's got some of the criteria listed in the report. Any initiative must meet those criteria to be eligible for the funding. So yes, it is about encouraging behaviour change at a community level, but also up to a commercial level as well for economic development opportunities as well around waste.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Hawkins. Sorry? Happy to move? Right. Any further questions? No further questions. Seconding Councillor Newell. Councillor Hawkins, do you wish to speak to this?
Yeah, just briefly. Thank you, Your Worship. And firstly, I feel like I need to apologise to my fellow councillors on the Grants Subcommittee, which is a role that has expanded somewhat considerably since the start of the triennium. So thank you for coming along for the ever-expanding ride. There's a lot going on, obviously, in the waste field at the moment. We're reviewing our waste management and minimisation plan. Our council's got its Waste Futures work stream. MFE are reviewing the tools within the Waste Minimisation Act. And from all of those things will come a combination of innovation and regulation and collective action if we're to achieve our goals of being a zero waste city, that is zero waste to landfill, because I think we're all increasingly becoming aware of the reality that individual action, that is the action of individuals operating under their own steam, isn't going to cut it when it comes to addressing those challenges. So this fund from the waste levy is a great opportunity to see what our community can come up with in terms of innovative thinking to address these problems, both at a community scale and most excitingly, I think, around the business sector and the work that could be funded through this in terms of business development and economic development in the waste minimisation field. And I look forward to seeing the applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Further speakers? There being none, and I assume you don't want to jump right up and exercise your right of reply with no one in between? That's right. Thank you. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay. On to item 18, second generation Dunedin City District Plan legal effective rules. Welcome, Ms Johnson.
I can introduce it because it's a little bit technical and can be confusing. I guess I get asked a lot of questions about what does taking effect mean and what does operative, so I thought probably I'll just explain it quickly. The Resource Management Act used to operate that when a new plan was written, the rules took effect immediately when that plan was notified, and what taking effect means is that those rules are live and they sit alongside the operative plan, the old plan, until the new plan is put through all of its paces and gets beyond appeal, and then they, as those appeals are resolved, then those provisions slowly replace the old plan. A few years ago, they amended the Act such that the provisions in the main they take effect once the decisions are issued, except they listed a number of topics which provisions related to those topics would still take effect when the plan was notified. However, it can become administratively difficult to have two plans operating side by side, especially when that's done in part. So we asked Council to resolve to hold those topics taking effect until the decisions, until the plan was operative, because that is the only type of resolution you're allowed to make. In which case, then you rescind that decision and all the decisions take effect at the same time. So that's where we're at now. So when the decisions come out in November, all the rules will take effect, and if this resolution is rescinded, that will include the ones that you previously resolved to not take effect until the plan became operative. And it is best described as an oddity of the legislation that you have to go through this step rather than being able to resolve that they all take effect at the same time. I hope that's clear. That's as clear as I can imagine I could think to explain it.
Make a one-word change to the resolution from council. Immediately.
I think provided for in section R to have legal effect, that's not, I don't think the so should be there. So in essence, when the rules become operative, they don't need to take effect because the taking effect is an interim step, and that's when the two rules sit side by side. When the rules are operative, they replace the old rules. So a question has been raised about the wording of the resolution, whether it makes sense, and to a degree it doesn't make sense because there's no point in having rules take legal effect if they're operative, because once they're operative, they're beyond that step. They're in step 2, if we want to call it that. So if you rescind your resolution so that all the rules will have legal effect once the decisions are released is perhaps a better wording to frame it in the what will happen rather than what won't happen.
This is okay as we...
I think, no, the so will not
it's
change
okay
it
as
quickly.
worded here,
It's resolution.
which is how you wrote it.
Yeah, so that it's written in the what won't happen rather than what will happen, if that makes sense.
So perhaps it would make it clearer, Ms. Johnson, if you explained to us what would happen if we didn't pass this. What would be the downside?
So if you didn't rescind your resolution, then the rules covered by that resolution would not have legal effect until the plan was operative. But having explained that once the plan's operative, you're past the legal effect stage anyways. So if you rescind the resolution, what will happen is they will all have legal effect once decisions are out.
Thank you. All right. Any further questions? Councillor Elder.
I was just wondering, thank you. I was just wondering why that resolution was put there in the first place, in the sense of what purpose did it fulfil?
The reason that we sought that the council resolve this is otherwise the Act says that the provisions related to historic heritage, significant areas of Indigenous fauna, significant Indigenous vegetation would have immediate legal effect once the plan was notified, and which basically means the rules are treated as live and they sit alongside the operative plan's rules, whereas all the other rules would wait until the decisions were done. And it means that you're administering two plans at the same time. So there's sort of an administrative burden that goes with that. And we felt that that administrative burden was not worthwhile. It was better for those rules to be put through their paces in terms of hearings and allowing decisions to come out rather than having them become live early, as the Act would allow or make automatic.
Thank you.
Councillor Vandevers.
Talked about quite a raft of provisions that you don't want to see become alive early. On the other hand, you're talking about the whole lot becoming operative later. How much later? What is the time difference that we're talking about here, given that this plan has been extended twice already now in terms of time, from 2 to 3 years to beyond 3 years, and now heading towards Christmas? How much going...
So if you rescinded the resolution, the rules would have effect earlier rather than later. So this resolution to rescind is going to mean they become live on the 7th of November. If you didn't rescind it, it would take longer.
So on the 7th of November, it all becomes live?
Yes, that's correct.
So there is actually no, there's no delay involved in this.
It's undoing a delay.
It's undoing a delay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, would someone like to move this? Councillor Staines, second to Councillor Gary. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Staines? I was hoping for an explanation, you know.
I thought the last explanation was very good.
It's a challenge. So, speakers. There are none. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 19, a Whero Stream subdivision, stage 2. Oh, not you again. How you doing? Right, would you wish to introduce this, or do you, there's a fair bit to introduce in terms of the resolution. We'll go straight to questions, councillors. Any questions on this? So, Councillor Steadman sitting back, you got that? Yeah. Councillor Elder.
Oh, it's just, thank you, Mayor and Leanne and co. It's just a question about, we're putting this through, but was there any consideration of the developer giving back to that area in the idea of plantings or what have you? Just, it's an aside really, but it's sort of like arts and infrastructure or trees and infrastructure or whatever.
So through the chair, not in consideration of this. So this is purely an administrative process of tidying up loose ends of the subdivision. So we haven't dealt to that particular subject in this report.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
It's a point of clarification. I was curious as to the timing of this and surprised that this particular part of the process wasn't perhaps done earlier, and I wondered if you could just talk to the timing of it.
Just throw to my learned colleague, our Chief Legal Advisor. Thanks, Christy.
Your mic's not on, Christy.
Thank you. This is the appropriate time for the step to be taken. Yeah.
Councillor Lord. Right. You're going to move it? You're going to read it out? No. Seconded Councillor Hall. Do you wish to speak to it then?
No, I think this is entirely...
Any other speakers? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, on to item 20. Appointment to the Museum Board. Ms. Bodecker, welcome.
Wait a second.
Hawkins is sitting. Thank you. We'll go straight to questions. Councillors, any questions on this?
No, I said happy to move.
Councillor Wilson, seconded. Councillor Staines. Right, there are no questions. It's been moved. Speakers? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. Thank you. Right. On to review of the local Easter Sunday shop trading policy. Well, welcome. Pickford. There. It's Gray. Right. Do you wish to introduce this?
No, we're happy to take questions.
Right. So, we know that this has been actually, although the staff are here to speak to it, it's been the subject of our hearings, and the recommendations are from the hearings panel, not the staff, obviously. But questions of staff for any clarification, if you... Any questions? Councillor Gary.
I had a question, and I'm not sure that it can be answered, but I'll ask it anyway. One of the things we talked about when we first considered this policy and leading up to that time was around if we got a whiff of workers being pressured into working. And there's many ways that can happen. And I note on page 67, item 20, there were 21 comments along those lines. And I was wondering if we could have a bit more detail of that, please. Is that possible?
That was a specific question that we asked, and that's all the detail we have at this stage. So it was just feedback that we got through the unions. We don't have anything from MB. We've asked whether MB have any specific feedback, but we haven't heard back yet. But that's probably all the information we can provide at this stage.
So just for clarity, we didn't have anyone directly talk to us about that. That was via the unions?
I think it was only via the unions from memory. I don't think anyone specifically came forward. Sorry.
Yeah, as a member of the hearing panel, I'm happy to have you. You're probably in as good a position as the staff.
I appreciate that.
Somewhat better, actually.
Well, no, the staff were fabulous at the hearing, assisting us, so they sat through the whole lot. But there were very few submissions, oral submissions, and there was one union representative, one unfortunately was sick and couldn't come and speak to us at her allotted time. The one that did come could only give us anecdotal information. There wasn't any hard factual information about that, but their feeling was that people were pressured. But it very, very difficult to work on.
Councillor Alden.
Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work. I'm just referring to write to MB on the following topics: an amendment to the shop trading hours to provide for a local Easter trading policy to take effect only if specified conditions are met. Is that referring to the likes of Ed Sheeran or things like that? Just to clarify that.
So the way the legislation is worded at the moment, you have to undertake a special consultative procedure in order to adopt a policy. So the way we could address that would be to suggest to MB that the legislation allows some flexibility. So a policy could sit in abeyance, and when resolved by council, if we had an event announced, the policy would then come into effect for that year, and then it would then go into abeyance again in the following Easter. So it would allow that flexibility without having to go through a special consultative procedure. So that was the idea of that suggestion, of contacting MB with that idea.
Just another question related to that. Then we haven't actually kind of thought through the parameters for that, like 60,000 extra people or something like that.
So that would be for the council to decide. I guess in each, it would be on a council by council basis. You would decide how you might approach that. So we would develop those parameters and say, for this level of event, it would then trigger, and then it will be up for that council to decide on what this is a major event for the city, and make that decision on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification there.
Councillor Hawkins.
Just indicating it was to move in due course.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vandevers.
Do we have any indication on next Easter's cruise ship numbers at this stage that could be relied upon? Has anyone from staff looked to see if we may have perhaps 2 or even 3 cruise ships in at the next Easter?
Perhaps John could.
It's too early to determine that yet, but we'd expect it'll be about the same as this year.
Councillor Wilson, did you have a question?
I just wanted to give some feedback about the sort of criteria that we were considering, and we've already got a major events festival and events strategy, and I think that thinking of the panel had been that if there was a major event, like the Guggenheim, for example, if that was on the art gallery, that significant exhibition that was on many years ago in Dunedin, that would bring a lot of people into the city, then that may be considered an event. So we've got a strategy already that talks about, or a plan that talks about what is a major event, and so it wasn't just about what's at the stadium, it was a much broader thought, but that would have to come through a plan setting those sort of criteria.
Thanks, Kate.
Further questions? Okay, we had an indication from Councillor Hawkins that he's happy to move. I'm not sure what. So do you want to tell us what you're moving, and then we'll see if we get a seconder.
It's fine. I'm happy to move that that council revoke the Dunedin local Easter Sunday shop trading policy with a revocation date of 1 January 2019.
Second, Councillor Laufiso. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Hawkins?
I will. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. The law as it stands and the framework that we operate under, this law operates under, I can support in theory in terms of offering greater flexibility for employers and employees. But I think it's important for us to be making our decisions grounded in the reality of the situation. And I have no interest in rehashing old speeches, you'll all be pleased to know. But I think the outcome was inevitable, and the feedback we got through this process was that some workers in vulnerable positions were always going to be feel compelled to work regardless of the protections that are afforded to them in the Act. And that alone I found worth a reason alone worth voting down the proposal the first time around, and it is certainly all I need to support the revocation of the policy in this instance. But I think what's truly remarkable about this process is the lack of clamour that we've had to continue on with this experiment. I can't imagine we're likely to have an Easter weekend of trading, the likes of which we saw in this calendar year again, and if that wasn't enough to motivate people to lobby for this to be continued, then I don't know what would be. I can't support and the reason I'm only moving this and not the recommendations of the Hearings Committee in their entirety is that I can't support the lobbying of MB for changes in the legislation. I can't support a resolution that allows us to trigger a review for another major event, however we choose to define that, because the reality of the situation for workers, particularly vulnerable workers in the city, won't change regardless of whether there's a major event on or not. And as to C1, I think it was, in the recommendations that asked Council to be able to be given the power to decide unilaterally based on whatever that trigger is, I think that's a very dangerous thing to be based on. And what would the criteria for a major event be? Is there a minimum number of people coming through the airport or a minimum amount of money coming through cash registers, at which point we're prepared to set aside what a principled approach to labour laws might be. It's a more mercenary position for this council to put itself in than I would have thought we would be comfortable with. So I'm happy to support the revocation of the policy and look forward to the previous regime being back in place by next Easter. Thank you.
I'll come to you, Councillor Van der Vis. I'll just note that what has been moved is the resolution that's on the water paper. It doesn't mean that the other recommendations aren't available to someone else to make to move if they so wish. So this isn't an either or. We'll deal with this one because this has been what's moved, and then anyone else can move whatever other recommendation they wish. Councillor Van der Vis.
Councillor Hawkins has said that there has been a lack of clamour to continue with the current trading policy. I have, in my council experience, never experienced a clamour to continue with the policy. We do get clamours occasionally to change things, but the fact that there's been no clamour to change the policy that was successful last Easter, and that all we have to change it is this whiff of worker pressure from one union rep. We haven't even had anything directly to this council, despite this being quite publicly debated and decided on. I think that Councillor Hawkins' lack of clamour to continue is not at all a reason to change. I think in order to change a policy, we would want to see some clamour or more than a suggestion from one union rep that it be a policy that we should change, especially since it was so successful last Easter. We had a large number of council staff that worked through last Easter. The council-owned Wall Street was open, and despite there being no pressure to open, all of the people on Wall Street, all of the businesses on Wall Street opened. We had an extraordinarily successful Easter. One of the, I think, most jolly and entertaining Easters, in fact, that I can remember, and I've got really no interest in country music at all, but just the vibe in the town and the liveliness of Easter was something that I found to be a great positive. That the inevitable, as Councillor Hawkins said again, feeling of some workers being pressured, that this has not come to us directly, that it's come through one union rep, that inevitably people feel pressured to work in any kind of situation. That's why we have songs like "I Don't Like Mondays." I think is something that is going to be very easily available. The idea that we are going to change a policy because somebody felt some slight pressure somewhere, when on the other hand you've got a large number of businesses, you've got the Chamber of Commerce, and you've got what was a very successful policy last Easter. I would like to hear some good arguments for changing that policy. I would like to hear a clamour from even a small number of people. If we'd got 2 workers that had written to us saying, look, you know, I really don't think it mucked up my Easter completely and I don't think we should do it, I would be all ears. But given that there has been no clamour to change, given that it was so successful last time, I believe we should be going for option 1, which is the status quo. We should give Easter trading, as it was successful last year, another opportunity to be successful. And if in fact there is a clamour for change, then we could do it at that point.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Worship. I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed Easter, as did many local families, and that was the resounding story I heard from so many about, even if they weren't going to the concert or any of the concerts, that they enjoyed the atmosphere in our town. But that was a particular situation, and we changed the rules with that in mind. That was the catalyst for us bringing in Easter trading this year. However, at the time we did that, we very clearly said that if we got so much as an inkling or a whiff of workers being pressured to work, then we would revoke it. That was said very clearly, articulated very clearly. And I, for one, have worked in jobs where it's a very subtle pressure that comes on you to work at Christmas and New Year. You can't be made to do so, but there are ways to put that pressure on. And as someone of more mature years who can be assertive when she needs to be, I felt that pressure. How is it for younger workers, vulnerable workers who aren't very confident? And so that's enough for me. We're not going to hear from them directly. There is no way that any of them are going to come to us directly and say that. That is just not going to happen. And so I'm perfectly fine with accepting those anecdotal stories through the union. And I take them at their word. I'm surprised that there were not more businesses open. I was very surprised at the businesses that did not open at Easter. Great, the ones that did, but not all of them chose to, and that's fine. But that did surprise me. So I will be supporting this motion. Another time, I voted in favour of it the last time. I heard the arguments from my colleagues about the pressure to work and all of those things. But on balancing up the arguments, I felt very comfortable to vote for it. I would consider it again if we had the need to do so. But on this occasion, I will be supporting the motion before us.
Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just regarding Councillor Vandervis's comments regarding there was no clamour, the policy was very, very clearly indicated that it was a short-term policy that was going to be reviewed within the 12-month period. That should have been enough to create a clamour if retailers were so inclined. There was little or need or want from our community on balance after sitting through the submissions and reading the written submissions. 8 retailers said that they would definitely open again. This knowing full well that we were in the process of a review. It was a hard decision last year for me, but we were assured this would clarify the fact that Dunedin was open for business, that it would clear up all the inconsistencies of the government policy. This didn't happen. We didn't see retailers opening en masse for our city to be considered open. Instead, due to the lack of uptake from retailers, and more importantly, an indication that there would be even less uptake next time when we didn't have 80,000 extra guests in town, there was said for me that there was a very, very little or no tangible benefits for our community. Time off and time with the family is important, and through the hearings, that's what we thought. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Your Worship, just want to make 1 point or 2 points. First is that I don't like Mondays is actually not a comment on the current work environment. It's about a mass shooting in California. On the other one, in terms of revoking at least the policy, I want to send this back to central government. This was moved to the local governments in a way to avoid answering the question. And for me, in and of itself, that's enough to revoke it. Just to say this is not something that should have been at our level. It was basically a failure of central government to basically get the spine to do it, and I want you to resolve it, not make us resolve it. So that's one of the reasons I'm revoking it.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to foreshadow pro forma that I will move the other motions, and I'll talk to those at a later time, and the reasons for it. I'll be voting for this motion here. I've taken the attitude that the status quo or the default position is that you don't open, and that is what most cities, of all cities, except for I think New Plymouth and possibly one other, have considered. That's their view. It's interesting that we compare this. This is very similar to freedom camping in that we've got a policy that central government, as Councillor O'Malley just said, Jim just said, should be the central government's decision-making body. They've done the same with freedom camping, and we've got now ad hoc right throughout the country, different policies which make it incredibly hard for visitors. And this is a time where visitors are at maximum and they just can't understand the whole system. And so the reason I refer to that is that if we want to be consistent with most of the rest of the country, then actually closing is the default position and the consistent one. Had I heard overwhelming support for opening, for businesses clamouring for that, I would have to really think much harder, but there wasn't that. The default position is that you close unless there's a really, really good demand otherwise, and that's made this decision particularly easy. I have, and I'll go into it later, some sympathy, though, for the residents of Dunedin when it comes to some inconsistencies between garden centres and do-it-yourself stores, where there was obviously a benefit to residents for that, for the exclusions to change. Yeah, that's it.
Further speakers? Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Your Worship. It really surprised me that there wasn't a stronger representation at the hearings for those in business who wish to stay open. And I read from that perhaps business is in the same position as the community. About half of us would like them open, about half of us wouldn't like them open. So I think I accept that the default position is probably where we should be. I am a little disappointed that information wasn't able to be obtained from MB on whether any formal complaints were made, because I remember clearly our discussion, and I think some councillors voted in favour of having the shops open at Easter, not only because of the cheering concert, but because of the fact that we made it very clear that if there was pressure put on and evidence that workers were being forced to work, that we would rescind it. And it seems to me that and I would expect the union to say they had an employee or a couple of employees who felt pressured. I would expect to hear that, because I do agree that employees who resist their boss, well, they don't resist their boss. So you expect a little bit of that. But the fact that there was, as far as we know, no formal complaints made, either by the union or by the employees, does make me wonder what was going on. I don't like the idea of opening for Easter trading one year and not the next, based on when we can make the most money as a city. I think this is a decision that has to be made on do we open or don't we open, and we do it, full stop. And I very much agree with Councillor O'Malley that the government should have had the strength to step up and make the decision themselves and not leave it to be scattered amongst us at a council level. So I would like to support the motions that are coming up on going back to government and asking them to make some modifications, but I can accept that in the interim we return to no Easter trading.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, well, I'd just say I don't support the motions, and it's for probably similar reasons, but I know there's a huge number of our community that do have to work on Easter Sunday. There's motel cleaners, there's hotel cleaners, there's restaurant staff, there's publican staff or whatever. There's people in our hospitals, our nurses, our doctors, our police, our fire services. And there's a lot of people that don't get the choice either. And while it's not because they don't get a choice, we shouldn't get a choice, but look, in the farming community, Easter Sunday's a pretty normal day to work. So look, I don't feel that there's been any negative implications, and I don't believe for a moment that there was people that were forced to work that couldn't work. I think that's just the sort of thing that you would expect union people to say. And in my opinion, I think we should be staying open.
Councillor Steadman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I get concerned when, from my background, I used to have to deal in fact. When I hear anecdotal evidence or and not fact and hearsay, that's very worrying, because anybody could say anything and actually not back it up. I hear pressure but no complaints. People could at least write a letter to somewhere and they could actually bring it along and actually provide that evidence. It would be a wee bit stronger than anecdotal. I remember Councillor Lord mentioning last time, he didn't say it this time, but he's a church-going man and things like that. And he has no problem working, and obviously others don't as well. And I come from the background, he mentioned the police. Now I actually, first time in 20 years, or longer actually, I'm just counting up in my head, 27 years, the first time I actually do get to have some time off, because I was one of those people that was actually working all the time. So it just worries me when we just deal in hearsay and anecdotal stuff, because it's not fact, and it's only a really small proportion of our community that are actually providing hearsay. There's not a lot of strength in it, and at the end of the day, thank you.
Councillor Laufiso.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to begin by recording my thanks to Councillor Hawkins for moving this motion, even though he wasn't one of us, the Hearings Committee. And also I'd like to record thanks to the staff for their patience and careful shepherding of us through the process, both times, last year and this year with the Hearings Committee. When we were campaigning in 2016, and I remember Councillor Weiler was there. Were you there, Rachel? We were asked this question about Easter Sunday trading. And I just want to acknowledge my upbringing as a Samoan Catholic. And I'm not a practicing, I'm a recovering Catholic, not a practicing one. But I do acknowledge very deeply my community, Pasifika people, are very devout and church-going people, and they, especially those who work in the retail industry, some of them submitted through the Hearings Committee process and said, this is a family day for us, Sunday is very important to us, and we want our retail worker home with us to be a parent and to, especially at a time that's important in the Christian calendar. So coming into the Hearings Committee last year, the process last year and this year, I was ever conscious of that, that values discussion really. Even though I'm not practicing, I do feel that we have to have some sacred times in the year and not constantly be consuming and shopping and trading, etc. So my stance has been consistent in terms of respecting the time of workers, and overwhelmingly the submissions from people last year were against opening, and this year they're in favour of going back to the status quo. So we don't have to worry about not only hearing from one union rep or not hearing from one union rep. If we read the submissions, which the Hearings Committee had to do, the majority were in favour of us going back to the status quo. And as Councillor Stain said, the decision taken to be open for business was because of Ed Sheeran and because of the hopes that there was going to be a clear monitoring or something of workers being coerced to work. So I just want us to actually bring into the discussion some sort of values aspect. Thank you.
To the speakers. Councillor Benson-Park.
Thank you, Your Worship. We all recall the content and detail of the discussion when this decision was originally made. And I want to compliment two groups. The first is the staff, because it's often the case that we're not as good at reviewing and carrying out reviews as indicated or desired within the time frame, and this has been given effect with alacrity and accuracy, and I think that's a very good thing. And the second group I want to compliment is the good sense of the majority of those on the hearing panel. The concerns that were expressed at the time of the original debate did transpire to be true. The community has come down on strongly from the papers, the discussion and the papers that are attached tonight on the side of reversion to the original position, and I think that's the most sensible and correct position.
For the speakers. Okay, for my part, I'd like to just go back to the original decision, and I recall that both in the community and around this table, it was fairly evenly divided, as Councillor Staines has said. It was kind of 50-50. But what was clear was, even then, there wasn't a strong, wide push to open. There was some submitters and some sections of the community who felt quite strongly about it, but it wasn't massive. And I remember that this council was kind of split both in numbers, but also individually. I mean, we could have gone either way in some ways. And what tipped it was the Ed Sheeran concerts and the need, and I acknowledge that, well, I think that was the right decision. There were that many more people in town. It was worth trialling at the very least. Fast forward to now, and I acknowledge that we did say that if there was evidence of workers being pressured, that we would reconsider it, but we're going to review it anyway. I support this motion, but not because of the fact that some workers may have been pressured. I suspect that it wasn't actually that widespread anyway. I support this because actually there's not been a great deal of pressure to go back, to continue with the policy that we put in place. It's been vehement from a couple of quarters, but actually one speaker, I think one of Councillor Vandiver said a large number of businesses haven't expressed their support for opening more at all. That's the surprising thing, was how few there were. So I support this because actually I think this is generally the community's view, and that those who don't necessarily share it don't care that much anyway. So I can support this, and as I say, not for the reasons of protecting workers' rights, because I think in the main they probably were treated not too badly, but I still think that the general consensus in the community, and it's certainly what came to the committee, and that's why we put it in front of a hearings committee, for them to listen to it and get an accurate view to guide us. That's the view they've presented to us. Councillor Hawkins, your right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and appreciate the support around the table for this motion. I just want to pick up on the point that a few people have made around there being no feedback to indicate, or very little feedback to indicate that people felt compelled to work against their legal protections. You know, a couple of comments in a letter from the union, and we shouldn't be surprised that the union would represent their members. It's the way that they operate and what they do. But according to the papers that we have before us, there were 21 comments, which isn't a few, and it isn't a letter from the union. It was a recurring theme in the feedback. And I mentioned at the last debate that we could always anticipate that these things would be underreported, whether it's through our review process or whether it's to MB, because publicly stating that you felt compelled to work against your legal protections is a pretty surefire way of, in a minority of employment situations, a pretty surefire way of getting less work out of your employer. And when you're a vulnerable employee making not very much money, that isn't a risk that many people are prepared to take, such as the power imbalance in our workplaces. So that doesn't surprise me that these things have been underreported, but nevertheless we certainly have had feedback to that effect, and I look forward to that no longer being the case next Easter.
Now I'm going to put this, and I think we might as well put it by division. Just getting in first, Councillor Benson.
Councillor Benson-Pope. Councillor Elder.
Yes.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall. No. Councillor Hawkins. Aye. Councillor Lefiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord. No. Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Staines. Aye. Councillor Stephen. No. Councillor Vandiver. No. Councillor Wilson. Aye. Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried 10-4.
Carried. Now, Councillor Wilson, you foreshadowed that you would move something else, something additional.
So in paragraph 33 of the report, the hearings panel made some other recommendations, and I think that they're worthy of being put. Whether they're accepted or not, I'm prepared to move them pro forma.
Oh, and you've got them, Lynn's got them, has she?
No, I think it's just been seconded. I was just waiting for to talk to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
second to Councillor Staines, yep, sorry, I misunderstood.
I just wanted to give some background to it. It is fraught, having made the decision we've just made, that another situation may happen that some people may say it is worthy of a special, that at Easter we open. And that was the discussion last time. I'm not sure what those parameters may be, but there is a major, as I said earlier, major events definition that we have, that you could say that where that situation arises, you could consider whether we invoke a policy to allow for for Easter trading. I'm ambivalent to it, but I'm happy to see it being put as part of the process we went through. The second one was an amendment to Section 4 of the Shop Trading Hours Act 1990 to include hardware and do-it-yourself stores. And we did actually have a very good submission from Neil Finhouse about Mitre 10. They chose to open one store, not both, or not the one out in Mosgiel. And the only reason we added that one is that there were 1,400 Dunedinites or residents, so they were quite clear they weren't Ed Sheeran concert goers, who actually had a demand for that service that day. Again, we're the committee are putting that up as reflecting the submission it heard, and it was compelling, as some people like to garden in those times, some people might want to build a garden wall, and what is the difference? So that's why that one was put. And the third one was an amendment to the notice period. One of the issues for staff, one of the issues that confronted us in both hearings was the power of the employer to decide to open without, and with all respect, the employee should be able to say no to that, but without any period of notice. And so what we think would be a better process is that people had a much longer notice period and can plan their holidays when the cheap flights and everything else, rather than later and wait to see if they're going to be having work. They are moot points, the last two, or the last one, considering the decision we've made, but I'm still thinking that even if there is a policy, it is still better, a better, more pragmatic way to resolve some of those issues. So to that end, I'm pro forma again, happy to put them up.
I just ask Councillor Wilson, the first para there talks about specified conditions, and I note that, and you've said you don't want to put them in here, but what process do you see this needing to go through in order to establish what those conditions are? I mean, we don't have to do them here. In fact, I think it would be a rather long-winded meeting if we tried to, but I think we need to be aware of what would be needed in order to establish those.
Appreciating the question, thank you, Your Worship. So at the moment, we have to go through a special consultative process to put a policy in, and I would anticipate that should we ever get to that point again, you might say, this is a policy that comes, it's either all in, or you may say that they can open should it be triggered by an event. Now, you know, we never know when an event is going to be scheduled into the stadium. We have no notice of, I don't know when anything will be, big event will be scheduled for Easter next. Or it may be at the Art Gallery, or it could be at some other event. But there may be criteria, so we'd have to consult on that separately, but once you've done that, you wouldn't need to keep on consulting on it, because it requires a lot of everyone to come along to be part of that process. So I think it's an issue that was clearly shown not to be black and white. It has got a lot of grey areas, and this would provide for some of that clarity.
So can I just ask for some comment from staff around, I'll take your point, so you'd be about the practicality and propriety of having maybe a special consultative procedure in order to establish a policy framework or a criteria framework for this. It's practical. I mean, I just don't want us to be in a position where we're passing something and then the staff say to us, well, actually, there's no way of actually achieving that, or no practical way or legal way. So I just want to be sure that this is...
So the way we would envisage it, you would adopt a policy, or we would say to MB, it would be great to have a policy that would be conditional, as opposed to a policy which at the moment is either, which is binary, which is either you can trade or you can't. So the idea would be a policy would be adopted that would sit in abeyance, which would be triggered by conditions, which you could then decide, you would decide on at the start to say, right, if these conditions are met, the policy is then allows trading, but otherwise it just sits there in the background, and Easter Sunday trading isn't permitted. So, which is different to what is currently under legislation.
So you've spoken to this, and it's a seconder, so I'll invite further speakers. Councillor Vandervis.
Would one of the specified conditions be perhaps number of visitors to the city anticipated for that period? Just because specified conditions, as the Mayor has highlighted, is pretty vague. I'm just wanting to know if number of visitors would be one of those specified conditions.
Can I suggest that, I mean, I'm happy for the mover to answer this, but when I said that it was vague, I wasn't being critical. I was saying that it just needed to know if it was practical to achieve the outcome of that. I don't, happy for you to answer, but the very point of it is I just wanted to ensure that there was a practical way forward to establish what those conditions would be. But by all means, Councillor Wilson.
Well, the example I gave was the major facilities, as a major events policy, which I think has a number in it. I'm not wedded to that. I'm just saying that there are a whole lot of criteria that you could do, and let's have that discussion when it's relevant.
And it may be that the conditions vary for different communities as well. So for us, visitors, for example, might be the trigger.
There's further speakers. No further. Well, I'm going to put this in that case. Do you want to take them separately? Okay. So I'm going to put the first one, and that is that an amendment to the Shop Trading Hours Act 1990 be made to provide for a local Easter Sunday shop trading policy. Lynn, can you get it onto the... it's obviously that projector.
It is, yeah.
To take effect only if specified conditions are met. I'm going to put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? No. I'll take it. I think we'll just do a division on that and be done with it because it's a bit difficult to tell. So if you could do a division on that, please.
Councillor Benson-Poe.
No.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Hawkins.
No.
Councillor Lefiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Stephen.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Wilson. Aye. Councillor Wiley, you good enough? Aye. Your Worship.
Aye.
Okay, carried 12-3.
Okay, I'm going to put the second one now, and that is an amendment to Section 4. This is what we'd be going to MB with. Amendment to Section 4 of the Shop Trading Hours Act to include hardware/DIY stores. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? It's carried. And the last one, an amendment to Section 51 of the Shop Trading Hours to increase the notice period to employees to between 16 and 12 weeks before the relevant Easter Sunday trading. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. Carried. Okay, thank you. We now move on to annual reports of Dunedin City Holdings Limited. Cooper? Now, do you wish to...
While you're away.
It's a lot of reading.
Okay, councillors, we go straight to questions on this, on these reports. So I invite questions of the team. Councillor Vandevers.
In the Aurora item 22, there is a reference to asset management, and I'm wondering if any one of you can confirm whether or not that the asset management plan for Aurora has changed such that instead of identifying a pole's condition, that in future the poles will be replaced on its age rather than identified condition.
My understanding of the plan is that they're currently still working on a testing regime that will focus on the condition. This is primarily because environmentally across the region there's 3 quite distinct environments, and the poles will perform differently over a period of time between areas. On top of that, we've also got 3 different types of poles as the future solutions. For Central, they're using steel poles, wooden on the coast, and a combination in the middle. So my understanding of the plan, it will be done on, first up is ensuring they've got the latest technology to test the technology in the future, and that'll be the basis of the asset management plan 50 years out.
Right, so you can confirm that ongoing it will be pole condition rather than pole age that will determine whether they change.
That's my understanding, particularly given that age and the previous regime has seen us remove some poles that arguably once they're removed from the ground, they probably could have withstood another number of years.
Okay, it talks about a large number of items needing renewing, and it says in particular poles, overhead lines and zone substations. I'm wondering whether or not oil-filled or gas-filled old technology underground cables should also have been included in that in particular list. Is it your opinion that the oil-filled and gas-filled cables that we currently have are not an issue?
That's not my understanding, and quite clearly they are an issue. The narrative in there may have identified a number of headline items. My take on it would be that overhead lines would include the infrastructure that supports the transmission of power on those lines, i.e. being the pots, as they call them, on those lines. And
the underground cables would be part of overhead lines in your understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Transmission lines.
No, that's fine. Have you got any idea what percentage of the underground high capacity cables are still of the old oil insulated and gas insulated type?
No, I don't.
Is it possible for you to get that information to me? It's a question I've asked before.
We can.
That'll be great. Thank you very much. If you look at financial results, again on the Aurora, this is page 72. We've got capital expenditure and the new assets increased by 74% to 78.4 million. Is this a 74% increase on last year, financial year?
I haven't got the exact page reference, but that would be my understanding, that they're always comparators to the previous year.
The previous year, okay, no, that's fair enough. It just wasn't quite clear. It says also here that the term borrowings increased by 63.2 million. It also said that total assets increased by 62 million. Basically, we're in a situation here where we're increasing borrowing massively and that the asset value is only increasing by the amount that we've borrowed? Or is that just coincidental?
I think that's coincidental. Clearly there is a substantially increased borrowing program to support the capital program, but it's very murky because there's got the natural cash flows coming from normal course of business coming through there as well. So I wouldn't link those two numbers as being relevant.
Right. If we look on page 67, it says total assets of 0.5 billion. Yet we're talking about spending almost $1 billion. Is it anticipated that the $1 billion that we're going to spend is going to triple the total asset value of the network?
That would be the natural assumption, given that the current asset value has been depreciated over the life of the asset, which is many years, which supports the fact that we've got an old network which needs to be renewed.
Right, yeah, I mean, you've said that would be the assumption, but I have asked this question before as well. Have you got any real world indication that the spending of this $1 billion is actually going to give us an extra $1 billion in total asset value?
The specific figure for renewal of the asset is $750 million over a 10-year period. So loosely say that's $75 million for the sake of this discussion. Traditionally, there's a plan of circa 35 to 40 million per year anyway, albeit they didn't necessarily get there. So that's the sort of averages to get to the 750 million over the 10 years. On top of that, you've got a largely different network that's being put in place. Not only are we replacing an old age network, a new infrastructure is required to support the growth in various out of Dunedin areas, particularly the central Otago region, coupled with the farming interests in that region as well. So it's not a like-for-like comparison. So we're going to end up with a bigger asset, a bigger and more substantive network after the 10-year period. Because factored into that network, of course, is the growth predictions over that 10 years as well as where we are starting from.
Naturally, it's going to be a bigger network and therefore going to have more value. But my question really is, have you looked seriously at the 750 million or the billion, whatever it turns out to be, investment that we're going to have to make, whether in fact we really do get a similar amount of increase in value in the asset in terms of what we could sell it for? I've had indications from business that they seem to think that this is extremely doubtful.
That's a bit of a different question between spend and what the ultimate asset's going to be worth, because that's going to be a derived calculation from some sort of valuation, probably some discounted cash flow model, which a buyer may potentially look to purchase it at. So we're putting in place a network and asset that is required to ensure continuity of supply to the region. A question about what it's going to be worth is different from what the book value is going to say it's worth after it's completed or during the process of completion. I'd also qualify the 750, that is the current calculation based on looking forward, based on today's cost of technologies and solutions. I think the company has a view that in time there could well be different solutions, given this is a 10-year program, which could well see that figure change or potentially change upwards if they find more challenges in the network as they start to pick it apart.
Okay, thank you. The Commerce Commission investigation on a number of accounts has the potential to impose substantial fines. Fines in the millions. Is there any provision currently made, either borrowing or in some other form, to actually pay for those out of profits, or is it possible that these $1 million potential fines from the Commerce Commission may come back to the ratepayer?
At present, it was a post-balance date notification that the Commerce Commission were looking to take action or are going to take action. The remedies form of any pecuniary penalty has got a long way to be played out. And to be fair, I'd perhaps rather not engage in the discussion on that, given that it is before courts or before the Commerce Commission as to how they are going to move forward.
Okay, but I understand from your answer that there is no provision currently made.
No, there's not, because there's actually no structure around what penalties
and I
could
understand that, and that's fair enough. There is, it's been brought to my attention that an Aurora employee has forwarded a report to management indicating that a large number of the poles that have been replaced were poles that did not need to be replaced, and that there are still a very large number of poles that actually do need to be replaced, and that the cost of pole replacement is somewhere in the region of 16,000 each when the national average is 9,000 each. Are you aware of any staff member report that mentions any of these issues?
I'm not aware of a staff member report, and I wouldn't expect to be aware of it. I am aware or recalling that the figure has been continuously used in our discussions with Aurora, and that it was circa $10,000 per pole on average to replace. So there could well be some, there's no doubt, when we have to put equipment up the side of a mountain in central Otago, that's going to cost more than $10,000. So the extremities could be out there, but the average has been stated to us as $10,000.
And you're confident that that is an accurate average?
I've got no reason to doubt it.
Thank you very much.
Further questions, councillors? Okay. Would someone like to move the Councillor Lord? Oh, that's right, you informed me of that. And seconded Councillor Newell. Would you like to speak to this, Councillor Lord?
Yeah, I don't mind speaking to it. I'm happy to speak to it. Look, I think these reports, well, for a reason we get them is because it's due. They have to declare them. But there were some things I noticed in these things that I'd just like to bring to people's attentions. I hope people do read them. I hope people do look at the balance sheets and those sort of things. But just a few wee things that I've taken from these. So. We get a lot of allegations that I was recently told that councillors have no idea what's going on with the companies, and I note that we do get quarterly briefings, but just some things I've read from this report. So in reference to Aurora there, in 2014 when I came on, they had a capital expenditure spend of 21 million. If you go through the years to this current year, it goes up 35 million, 37 million. That was when the power poles were notified and we had the whistleblower. Last year they spent 45 million on their capital expenditure, and this year it's 78 million. I do note that term borrowing that Councillor van der Vos referred to, but I think the other thing is in the report that there was 5,000 poles that have been replaced or reinforced. So reinforced is using top techniques. And I think one of the problems sometimes when you're reactively reacting to whistleblowers and allegations, and we don't do our thing, we do end up getting poles coming out of the ground that we would rather in hindsight have left, and I think that's a problem. And sometimes when you act by the media and by whistleblowers and Facebook, you don't necessarily get the very best outcomes. I'd note Delta, when I came onto council in 2014, they had an equity position of 13%. Now that's at 36%. Also noting revenue for Delta at 93 million this year, Aurora 106 million. You know, those companies are doing not too badly. The dividend paid from Delta is noticeable when you look at the value of the company. What they're paying out is pretty good. City Forests, I don't know if anyone's looked at that, but in the SOI, their goal is to try and pay 6% or 6.1% long term. This year they paid 16%. The last 3 years they've averaged 15.1%. They've got an equity of 69% and a before tax profit of 34.5 million. Pretty impressive figures, I reckon. Mind you, I'm not an accountant, so maybe someone will have a different view. Dunedin Airport is another one that they've had passenger numbers up, they've had everything going well, they've increased their profit from, in 2014, 12 million, or their revenue, sorry, not their profit, their revenue's gone up 12.5, 12.7, 13.1, 14, and this year 16.5 million turnover. So I just think some of these things are, I just want people out there to know that we do keep an eye on these things and that we do care about the companies and we do care about safety. And I believe our new Aurora board particularly cares about the safety of the people in the community. And in fact, the very reason that they've breached the Safety and Safety and the Commerce Commission of Industry are interested in them is because they put people's safety ahead of people's power supply. And so they've turned off the power to replace poles, and I commend them on that, knowing that they went into a situation. We were briefed as councillors and we were told before this happened that they were going to breach, and this was the reason why. So I commend them, and I commend Richard Fletcher, I commend Steve Thompson and the other people that are involved in making hard decisions. So I'm just happy to note these reports.
The speakers? None. All right, I'm going to put this. This is to note the 9 reports. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll move on to item 23, non-trading council-controlled organisations exemption. Mr Toombs, do you wish to introduce this? Or it's pretty explained. Anyway, questions of you? Councillor Vanders.
Happy to move.
Happy to move.
Second.
Excellent. Who's seconding? Councillor Staines. Do you wish to speak to this, Councillor Vanders? Any other speakers? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to, that's it. Oh, well, we'll be having a break anyway, even a couple of minutes. Notice of motion from Councillor Hawkins. Do you wish to speak to this, Councillor? Oh, Councillor Vandervis, thank you. Excellent.
Myself, thank you. This has long been, and it's been circulated in advance, but all this is doing is asking for council's support for the West Harbour Community Board's position that the George Street stretch of State Highway 88 in Port Chalmers be reduced to 30 kilometres an hour versus the current speed limit of 50 k's, and that part 2, that NZTA undertake a review of the speed limit so that any such outcome can take effect by the 1st of October 2019, an arbitrary date for the start of the summer tourist season. This has long been the ambition of the Community Board. It's supported by local businesses, as the motion suggests, and does have the support of the Chief Executive of the Port Company, which is helpful. We've got an ever-increasing number of visitors coming through Port Chalmers. The first of them arrived last night. Very excited about the innovations being made in terms of cruise ship horns, regaled as we were with the Love Boat theme sometime after dark last night. But an increasing number of visitors in unfamiliar territory and, shall we say, a spectrum of mobility coming face to face with freight hurtling down the highway is not only a safety concern, it's also an amenity one. I mean, we appreciate that it's a working port and you're not going to stop trucks coming in and out of there, but I don't think it's too much to ask for them to slow down, and certainly when it was done temporarily over the summer, a couple of summers back, business didn't seem to grind to a halt. The reason NZTA have given for not doing this previously has been that they don't have the tools to do so, that they can't reduce the speed on the state highway network below 50 kilometres an hour. That has changed, but the indications we've had from them is that they might get round to doing the review in Dunedin sometime in the next 18 to 24 months, which seems a very long way away. So all this is doing is asking for council's support for the community board's position and to request NZTA to undertake the review of this site. I don't think it's necessary to review the entire district's roading network, which seems to be their preference sometime in the years ahead, to review this particular thing in time for any decision or any outcome of that review to take effect before the next summer tourist season. Thanks.
A question, Councillor Hawkins. You referred to the fact that it had changed, the situation had changed. Has it changed in that the rules have changed, or has it changed in that they've discovered that they had the power they didn't know they had?
I couldn't possibly comment on the latter. The official word that we've been given is that historically their only tool to reduce the speed limit below 50 kilometres an hour was to facilitate temporary road works, and that was how they shoehorned the summer trial in a couple of years ago, but they didn't have, this is from, I've got no reason to question it, but that their framework has changed, or their toolbox has changed somewhat to allow for a permanent decision along those lines to be made if such was warranted.
For the speakers, Councillor Wilson.
I'd be delighted to support this. In fact, I'd almost prefer that it was slightly more ambitious and could start next month. It seems perverse, and to answer your question, Your Worship, it seems that safety is now one key driver under the new GPS for the Land Transport or New Zealand Transport Agency, and that has allowed this situation to happen. It would seem to me that in answering the question, the local general manager suggested that it would take 2 years to review Dunedin City. Given the work that this community board has already done and the data already collected, it seems perverse to me that the information isn't already available to NZTA to make a decision immediately. They have done all the groundwork, they've got all of the support, and they, talking about the tourists, regrettably, most of the, and why this decision is so necessary is that many of the tourists coming are looking the wrong way on these roads, thinking that they're still at home and aren't acclimatised to our road conditions. They don't get a nice presentation on their flight in to tell them how to drive and where to drive, and that's why it is really necessary at the site, which is often their first port of call, literally. So, having noted I would happily see this be the 1st of November 2018 if it were possible, and I would encourage the NZTA when they see this motion to be much more ambitious with than the motion itself.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no problem supporting this. I recall when I was on Community Board that the West Harbour Community Board and the Port Chalmers community has had a long-held frustration around the time it's taken and the difficulty to get this changed. And living in an area that also has a growing visitor presence and growing traffic, it's the local community that really feels this, and often are the ones that suffer. I have sat in the cafe at the bottom of George Street in Port Chalmers and watched, horrified at some of the movements of traffic there, particularly as logging trucks have come flying down there and people have tried to cross the road. And I take what Councillor Wilson says about people travelling. We have a saying in our family, which is part American, and find that when we travel that we sometimes have to acclimatise either way. We have a saying that people when they're on holiday leave their brains in pickle jars, which basically they have that herd mentality. You're on holiday, you're relaxed, and you don't perhaps think quite in the same way, with no disrespect to our visitors. One of the comments we made, and I listened with interest at that NZTA workshop, one of the comments that I made at the time is we should never have to wait till there's a fatality or serious injury. But that's the way the stats are compiled these days, is hotspots are shown through where there's a fatality or a serious injury, not so much near misses. But I do appreciate that the West Harbour Community Board certainly got a lot of information there, and we don't want to wait until a local resident is hurt or a visitor is hurt. So I'll certainly support this motion.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this motion. I did actually call NZTA up about this because I knew it was coming, and this is the real reason I'm really supporting this, because the feedback was that they will keep going ahead at their space and at their pace, and that sometime around it'll be guaranteed to be delivered before June of 2020. So the issue I think we might also be facing here is our ability to communicate across different sectors of government, and when we have different controlling authorities, how we get the community wishes across. So I am imploring that we move forward with some of the initiatives we have in terms of getting those people into the same room so that the city can actually speak clearly about its wishes when it comes to NZTA and other such things as the ORC and the buses. And I think we're moving forward on that, and I hope that keeps moving forward. And the last point I'd like to make is that the government policy statement on transport does say now that you must take into account community interests. And so I would say that as we're sending this back, I hope this starts a dialogue, and that when we start that dialogue, we'll be talking about the community outcomes for the Port Chalmers community, not just a safety component, because the feedback is that, well, there haven't been any fatalities on the main street, so it's not dangerous. So I think we need to talk about more about what is the effect of the speed of traffic going through that density, and is this the community need? Thank you.
Councillor van der Vos.
I'm delighted to learn just now that the NZTA is able to change the speed limit because of temporary roadworks, and the obvious solution for us, I believe, as the DCC, is to simply change a Port Chalmers manhole cover, drag the chain and make that change a little longer than usual to get us at least through the cruise ship season. So if anyone and staff could organise a little roadworks for us in Port Chalmers, I think we have the problem solved.
Any further speakers? There are none. I'll put, or do you want to exercise your right of reply? No. Okay, I'll put all those in favour. Please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And that is the end of the public part of the meeting. So I'll move from the chair that we move into non-public for the reasons stated on the order paper, and that Dunedin City Holdings Limited representative Keith Cooper, as a director, be permitted to attend the meeting to speak to item C5. Second to Councillor Staines. And the CEO of Gemma, the CEO of Holdings as well. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.